Morning, everyone. This is Terry with Chevy and Us, and we're here today with Phil Kaiser, the guy who started all of this. And we just wanted to visit with Phil a little bit about this truck and have him just kind of share his memories. We're just going to kind of walk around it and look at it and maybe ask a few questions here and there about it. But Phil, this was sitting on your granddad, John Gray's old ranch in Montana, correct?
Right.
Yeah. And as a little boy, you told me you don't even remember how young you were when you started going out there every summer and working on the ranch, and you'd spend the whole summer there with your granddad.
Absolutely, yeah. I was kind of the only grandson that had any interest in the ranch, so I was kind of the special guy. And a whole bunch of bachelors up and down the little Porcupine Creek, which is this area north of Forsyth where the ranch was, and they just kind of treated me like their own son or grandson. And so I'd go to town and run into them. They'd buy me a new straw hat or a pair of gloves or things. It was a real special time in my life. This truck was purchased new by my uncle, who had been a sheep herder all his life, and when he got ready to retire, he bought himself a trailer and he needed a truck to pull the trailer. And he ordered a new 55 Chevy pickup, and he couldn't get it, and so he ended up with this one because he just got to the point where he had to have a truck. And he stayed with us in Billings for, I think about 6 months with the trailer and the truck parked in the trailer parked in the yard. And then when he got a truck, he moved to Forsyth and lived with my cousin's family. And one of my cousins saw some of this information and called me and said, well, he lived with us, and we used to call him Uncle Alec or Hunk Hack. And I don't know how he got the name Hunk Hack, but it was probably one of us as little kids. We couldn't say Alex or something like that. Anyway, he stayed with them until he was able to move out to the ranch. And then he got prostate cancer and went to the VA hospital in Miles City and died after about a year. And my grandfather, who was his brother, took the truck over. And when I got to be 14, you could get a driver's license in Montana, and this kind of became my truck. And so I would drive this truck in the summer when we went to camp and everything. And I noticed in one of your videos that you talked about all of the dents in the tailgate.
Let's go back there.
And
let's go back there and tell us how all those dents got there.
I think a little interesting story. The ranch was a sheep ranch, and we had a sheep wagon, and the herder was there, and we would take the chopping block, which was, from month to month it would be various heights, but you'd take your chopping block and you'd have a axe, and you'd put your wood down and split the wood, and then you had a wood burning stove in the sheep wagon. The sheep wagons had no refrigeration or anything in them, and when he would come to move the wagon, which was about once a week, he'd pick up the tongue and take the chopping block and set it here, and they would just back up until they touched it.
Till they hit it. And
sometimes it was a little harder than other times, so that explains how those things all got
well, they were pretty consistent right in this area right here. They did get a little high here and here once, and a couple down in here. You can kind of see where it consistently got right there. But
you bet. But I spent lots of time in this pickup. I'd take the rifle and go out in the evening after dinner and shoot jackrabbits and bring them back and hang them in the chicken house, and the chickens would eat the rabbits. And there was always a couple dogs, so I always took a dog with me and just go out and sit in the prairie, and you'd run out and just stop and turn off the truck, and there would be no sounds.
Dead silence.
Absolutely dead silence. And then you'd maybe hear an airplane, you'd hear a meadowlark. It was absolutely just a wonderful place to grow up. And of course, being the special grandson, I mean, I was just catered to. We went to town on Saturday mornings, and we'd stop at the, usually had a 55-gallon barrel that we would get gas, so we'd stop at the gas station, Johnny Sun's, and he would come out, and it had one of those old pits that you'd drive over. They changed the oil and stuff. There was no hydraulic lifts, and Johnny would put the gas filler in the barrel, and we'd go in, and I'd get a pop, and we'd sit and tell stories, and then the thing would be full, and we'd go out and get it and fill up the truck, and then we'd stop by the post office, and then drop my grandmother off at the house, and she had a little egg route. She'd go around with her eggs and get all the week gossip for the town. And then we'd take the grocery list and go over to Sawyer's, which was an old grocery store with the boxes and the string that they'd wrap around them, and the big tall shelves that you could get a post to get some cereal off the top box and things like that. And then we would go over to the granary, maybe pick up some feed for the horses. My grandfather used to call the horses the idle rich, because they got watered and fed oats every day with just that special kind of treatment. And then we'd go to Blakesley's, which was a little bar that had a lunch counter in it, and we'd go there and have lunch. And my other grandfather was the bartender there, so he would always buy me a pop and set it up, and then we'd have a burger, and there would be a pan game going back in the back room, and there was a bulletin board where they posted, auctions and stock movement things and all that. And that's where we would find the trucker that was going to move the bucks from our place to the buck pasture, and maybe move the wool, or you'd find out where the shearers were, because they were coming down the valley. Everybody had sheep at that time, and just a great time to be alive. Real slow-paced thing. And then we'd walk down the street and go to the Hub Thisted, which was the old haberdashery for getting your new gloves or a pair of jeans or socks or whatever. And usually back up to Blakesley's, and my grandfather would give me a silver dollar, and I could call my cousin, and we would go to the movie, the Saturday matinee, and it cost a dime for us each to get in, and I could buy popcorn and a drink and some Milk Duds or some Dots for the two of us, and still have money left over. So when that got over, I'd go down to the post office, and they had a little counter in there that sold ice cream and magazines, and I'd get a couple of Dell comic books, Scrooge McDuck and some of those guys, and I'd get a couple of those for a nickel or a dime, and then I was set for the week. Then when we got ready to leave, we went by, got my grandmother, and went by Sawyer's, and the groceries were all ready to be picked up, load those, and then
head back out to the
30
ranch.
mile back out to the ranch, and you were out there all week long. We had no electricity, we had no phones. I remembered when we got the motor for the pump, so that when we went down to pump water in the morning, we didn't have to stand there all morning. We had rigged up a deal with belts that would run a jack that would work the pump. And my grandfather cut off the end of his finger one day when the belt started to go off, and he just went to hit it, and his finger went in and took the end of his finger off. He reached down, picked the end of his glove off, and looked at it, and got in his pickup, drove to town, and they couldn't sew it back on, so he always had a stubby.
And he probably never stuck his hand in there again, right?
I don't think he did. No, I don't think he did.
We were noticing in this license plate, and you and I've kind of talked about it. The actual plate has the number 70 on it, so 1970, but it also has remnants of a tag that was put on there. Your best guess on when this was last registered? I think you mentioned to me you thought maybe 1972 was when the last time.
Yeah.
Any ideas? Or
I don't have a clue. But it would have been. See, I got married in 70 and took my new bride down to meet my grandfather and stuff, and I don't recall the truck being used for anything other than maybe like the herder had it, or at lambing time they used it as an extra truck to run out. So it was probably, I don't have a clue what it was.
Well, let's go in here, Ryan, and just show them the odometer, and then.
Well, and real quick too, when was the last time you remember going out to the ranch?
I went out about 15 years ago to get the sheep wagon, and I had an Uncle George who was always going to restore it. He loved the ranch and spent lots of his time out there, especially after he retired. He worked for the BLM and was stationed in Miles City, which is just 50 miles away from Forsyth, and then another 28 miles out to the ranch. But he was always going to do it, and he got into his late 80s, and he said, you know, I'm just not going to, are you interested? And I said, sure. So I went down and got it. Had a big warehouse in Great Falls that I kept it in for a few years, and then when I sold the warehouse, I went and got it and took it to a canvas shop, or a big upholstery shop that could do heavy canvas work, and we put a new top on it and stuff, and end caps. And then here about 6-7 years ago, I just had a big sale and a guy bought it, and he just absolutely loves it. He's restoring the whole thing and stuff, because it was pretty deteriorated. It had sat out without a top on it for about 10 years, even though they had a canvas. The canvas had rotted and they had replaced it. So, yeah, I was interested to see what the mileage was on it. 41,932, and I don't think, other than one trip we made, my grandfather and I made a trip from Forsyth out to Belgrade, which would have been about 250 miles. I think that's as far as the truck ever went. Most of the time it was started and went 2 to 3 miles, and that's as much as it was moved. And then you go to camp, which, you know, where the wagon was, and, you know, talk about what's going on with the sheep and have a cup of coffee, and then turn around and go back to the ranch. And Granddad always, in my memory, always had a 4-wheel drive. Well, not always, because he had a late GMC right after the war he bought, but as soon as he could buy a Jeep pickup, and I think that was 49 or 50, he bought a 4-wheel drive, because there's nothing like gumbo. We took this truck to town one time. I had an uncle coming from California, and my grandmother just had to be to town, and so I was driving, and we got into some gumbo, which you guys experienced a little of, and we filled these wheel wells full of gumbo to the point that the tires would not move anymore.
So for a definition of gumbo, for those who don't know, it's a heavy clay that
Very
when it
sticky.
gets wet, it is sticky as all get out.
And it's not runny, it's just big clumps, and it is the worst stuff in the world. So I was down on my hands and knees with my hands up in there digging that clay out, this gumbo, till I got it to the point, all 4 of them, where the wheels would go around again. And so we'd go another 6-7 miles, and it would just lock up, and I'd, Granddad say, time to get out again. So I'd get out and get up in there, and of course I was riding in the back. And at that time we had a stock rack on these. You had a rack that was only this high, because you would haul sheep around, and it would have a 1x6 here and a 1x6 here and another 1x6 with about a 4-foot opening between those.
I mean, 4-inch opening.
Or a 4-inch opening. So the rack went across the back and down the side, and then you had another rack that would go across the back that you had fastened to the side of the we called it a stock rack, but it was basically just a rack big enough to keep sheep inside when you had to hold one. A funny story, my grandpa, we were shearing one year, and my Uncle Alec was still alive and driving this, and he was a terrible driver. And when he put it in gear, he just always dropped the clutch, and the wheels would spin, and then he would go. And he never did learn to feather the clutch. Well, we had a buck that had got in with the ewes, and a ewe is a female sheep, a buck is a male sheep. And when you sheared, you wanted to separate the wool because the buck wool was a little more coarse. And so this buck got in, so we had to catch him, and I caught him, and we drug him out, and my Uncle Alec brought the truck around, and we dropped the tailgate and threw the buck in the back, and my grandfather got in to hold him, and he's sitting on the tailgate. Alec drops the clutch. My grandfather, who was at that time probably in his, like my age, mid-70s to late 70s, he falls out of the back of the truck, and the buck lands on him, breaks his rib, dislocates his shoulder, and so we got to stop everything and take him to Forsyth and then to Miles City so they could set the
So Uncle Alec dumped his brother John out on the ground.
Yeah, and I was probably 13, 14, and I thought I was pretty with it, and I'd be able to continue doing the sheep shearing operation, and because I knew how everything worked and all that. Well, that wasn't to be. They called my Uncle George, and he left work right then, and he came down and took charge, and I was just a little kid sitting back in the back.
This was your big moment to prove your manhood.
That I could run that ranch, you know, and do everything, and George kind of blew me out of the saddle there, but
oh,
yeah,
well.
Alec was terrible. He probably put half of those dents in there the way he drove.
That makes a lot more
was
sense.
pretty capable about it.
Well, just quickly, going back to the mileage, and we're not trying to whip a dead horse here, but what's your gut feeling tell you? Is that the actual miles on this trip?
Absolutely. I have not any. There's no reason that wouldn't be the actual mileage.
Yeah. We pulled the dipstick the other day, and maybe we do that real quick. You know, it's fascinating to me because of the way the oil looks.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a fresh oil change,
Well,
but
I
it's
know the oil
certainly
was-
not very.
The oil was probably changed 3-4 times a year. I mean, it was not any, 3,000 mile or 4,000 mile change. It was because you're lots of dirt in the air, lots of hay and straw blowing around, and Granddad was a real stickler on
keeping the equipment
running and well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's maybe the oil that was in it could have only been a few hundred miles.
Yeah. Pretty clean.
He would drive it to town and take it to Sunts and have the oil changed. He didn't change it out there himself, although he did on tractors and things like that. But the cars pretty well went in there.
Yeah.
And I don't think he had a place that he could drive up on and get underneath there. And again, he was pretty old at that time. Look at the color of the green. I mean, the green, you could just shine that up and it'd be just like new.
Absolutely. I kind of rubbed my hands across here, and it's interesting. Still got the factory.
Oh yeah.
What would you call those markings? The factory crayon markings on the firewall there.
From the assembly line.
From the assembly line, yeah. So it's astounding. Well, you just don't find them like this anymore, or they're pretty dang hard to find like this, for sure.
My grandmother never learned to drive, and she asked me in confidence one day if Granddad was gone, if I would show her how to drive. Well, this was the pickup that we got in, and I put her in the driver's seat, or maybe I got in first and showed her the clutch and the acceleration and everything, and then seems to me there's a throttle on it, and so I kind of controlled that, and she got in there, and I said, now just let that clutch out a little bit, just kind of feel it engage, and she started to let it out, and as soon as it moved, she screamed and let the clutch off, and her foot went right to the floor, and we were heading right for the stock, one of the old wagons and stuff, and I reached over and hit that brake, and it just kind of chugged to a stop, and she said, I can't believe I did that. And I said, and that's the only chance you're going to get with me to teach you to drive. That's it. I'm not going to. She wanted to have, you know, Granddad come back and have her say, I'll take us to town today or something like that. And I mean, I was just in a cold sweat because I knew we were going to just demolish,
be dead.
just demolish this truck. And she was screaming at the top, ah! And going across the lot around the house.
Amazing memories.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, we sure appreciate your time today. We're in Arizona, and Phil comes down here for the winter time,
Yeah.
and you live over in Mesa.
I'm a snowbird.
Yeah.
We're here 7 months now and 5 in Montana.
There you go, and
And
you're
we're getting
about to
ready
hit bed. Yeah.
Another week and a half, we go back to Montana.
Perfect timing because it's supposed to be 100 and 102 all next week. So
I'll go back
actually, maybe this week.
to 50 to 60 degrees, maybe up in the 70s for a couple weeks, and then it'll start warming up.
Well, we really appreciate your time today and coming out and reminiscing with us and giving us some of the history of this truck.
Well, enjoy it.
Thank you very much.